I had 30 days to make grass grow on a patch of land God himself had given up on. Fail, and the HOA would start fining me daily before slapping a lien on my house. Yeah, I was about to lose my home because our neighborhood's queen bee has a personal vendetta against the color brown. Of course. Let's rewind a bit from that kitchen table, and I'll tell you how we ended up in that mess in the first place. It's funny, we never even really wanted that house, you know? Not in that neighborhood. Claire and I were living in a condo downtown that we loved. It was loud and cramped, and our parking spot was half a block away, but it felt alive. I had my freelance graphic design business humming along from a corner in our living room. Claire was teaching just a few miles away, and life was simple. But then came the talk. The one about the future with a capital F. Kids, schools, a yard for a hypothetical dog we didn't own. Claire, my ever-practical and forward-thinking wife, had spreadsheets. She'd mapped out school districts, property taxes, crime rates, the whole 9 yards. And every single spreadsheet pointed toward the suburbs, specifically to a sprawling development called Meadow Creek. The name alone should have been a red flag. It sounded like it was generated by an AI that had been fed nothing but pictures of placid-looking white families and golden retrievers. When we first drove in, I felt a part of my creative soul shrivel up and die. Every house was a slight variation of the one next to it. Some with the garage on the left, some on the right. Some were beige, some were taupe, some were a daring greige. It was a monument to conformity. It's just so clean, Claire had said, her voice full of hope. It's the architectural equivalent of a saltine cracker, I muttered back. But she was right about the schools. And the houses were solid, and you got a decent amount of space for your money. So we went to see the house at the end of the cul-de-sac. And that's where we first met the slope. It wasn't just a hill in the backyard. It was a geological feature. It looked like the builder had gotten halfway through grading the lot, shrugged, and just left for lunch, never to return. It was a steep 45-degree drop-off at the very back of the property, a wedge of pale clay-like dirt that looked like it had been baked under a heat lamp for a century. A few pathetic, stringy weeds clung to it for dear life. It was without a doubt the ugliest part of the entire property. That's quite a feature, I said to the realtor, a woman with a smile so bright it felt threatening. Oh, that, she chirped, waving her hand dismissively as if it were a pesky fly. Incredible potential for terraced gardening. A little hydra seed and it'll be a beautiful green backdrop. Great for erosion control. Hydro seed. Erosion control. These words would come back to haunt me. We talked about it that night. The house was at the top of our budget, but it checked all of Claire's boxes. The slope was my big hang-up. It was this giant, ugly question mark sitting at the edge of our future home. But Claire, bless her heart, was optimistic. Alex, think of it as a project, she said. We can fix it. It'll be our thing. So we bought it. We signed the mountain of paperwork, including the thick, phone book-sized binder of HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions, which, I confess, I only skimmed. At the time, it just seemed like a bunch of boring rules about not painting your house purple or leaving your trash cans out. Standard stuff. How bad could it be? The first year was actually pretty great. We unpacked, we painted the interior walls colors that weren't beige, and I built a proper office for myself. Claire planted a small vegetable garden in the sunny part of the yard. We ignored the slope. It became a kind of running joke. It was our own private moonscape, the one part of our property that the Suburban Perfection Police couldn't touch because it was so fundamentally broken. It was our little patch of rebellion, a silent, dirt-colored middle finger to the pristine green lawns surrounding us. We'd even seen the queen bee herself, Brenda Jenkins, on her daily patrols. She was an institution. A woman in her 60s with a helmet of perfectly coiffed silver hair, a visor, and a clipboard she carried with the authority of a UN peacekeeper. She'd walk the sidewalks, slowing down to make little notes, her eyes scanning for any blade of grass that dared to be non-compliant. The first time she saw me, I was out front, wrestling with a new garden hose. She gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and a long, slow look at the dandelions that were starting to crop up near my driveway. No words were exchanged, but the message was clear. I'm watching you. But she left us alone, mostly. The house was new. The lawn was mostly green, except for the slope, which was out of her direct line of sight from the street. Life went on. We settled in. We started to feel like this house, this saltine cracker of a house, was actually our home. It was our sanctuary from the world. And all the while, the slope just sat there, baking in the sun, waiting. It was a problem we knew we'd have to deal with eventually. We just never imagined that eventually would arrive in a beige envelope, threatening to take away the very home we were just starting to love. The first move didn't come with a thunderclap. It came on a sunny Saturday afternoon, tucked into a beige envelope with the Meadow Creek HOA logo embossed on the corner. I remember I was in my office, deep in the zone, working on a branding package for a new brewery. I was actually in a great mood. The client loved the initial concepts, Claire was outside humming to her tomato plants, and for a moment, life in the Saltine Cracker House felt pretty damn good. I went to the kitchen for another coffee and saw the envelope lying on the welcome mat. It hadn't come with the regular mail. This was a hand delivery. My first thought was that it was an invitation to a neighborhood block party or something. We'd been here over a year and were still the relative newcomers, so it seemed plausible. I picked it up. It felt stiff. Official. I slid it open with my thumb and pulled out the single sheet of thick, cream-colored paper. The letterhead was professionally printed. The language was polite, sterile, and utterly chilling. It was a courtesy notice of covenant violation. I had to read it twice. It mentioned my property address, and then, in a clean sans serif font, it detailed the problem. Violation of Article 4, Section 4.8, failure to maintain landscaping standards. Below that was a short typed description. The rear portion of the property, specifically the sloped embankment, exhibits insufficient green coverage and presents an appearance inconsistent with the established aesthetic of the Meadow Creek community. Insufficient green coverage. They were writing me up for dirt. My dirt. The specific patch of dirt that had been a barren wasteland since the dawn of time. I started laughing. It was just too absurd. It was like getting a ticket from the nature police because a tree in your yard wasn't leafy enough. I walked over to the back door and slid it open. "Hey, Claire!" I called out, holding the letter. "You'll never guess what we just got." She looked up from her weeding, wiping a bit of sweat from her brow with the back of a muddy glove. "Is it from the HOA?" Her voice was instantly cautious. She's smarter than me that way. She knew the beige envelope was never a bearer of good news. "It's a love letter," I said, walking out onto the patio. "A love letter to the slope. Apparently they're concerned about its insufficient green coverage. ... I handed it to her. She read it, and unlike me, she didn't laugh. Her shoulders tensed. "Alex, this is a formal notice. What does it mean?" "It means Brenda Jenkins has too much time on her hands," I said, still treating it as a joke. "It's a courtesy notice. It's not like it's a fine. I'll just go talk to her. I'll explain the situation, that the surface of that thing has the same life-sustaining properties as a brick, and that will be the end of it. It's just a misunderstanding." Claire looked from the letter to the slope, then back to me. "Be nice," she said, in a tone that suggested she knew I was already failing at that. So later that afternoon, I took a walk. I strolled down our perfectly clean sidewalk, past the perfectly manicured lawns, to Brenda Jenkins' perfectly symmetrical house at the top of the street. Her rose bushes were famous in the neighborhood. They were immaculate, almost unnaturally so, with huge, flawless blooms, not a single brown leaf or aphid in sight. It was the horticultural equivalent of her hairstyle. She answered the door herself, wearing a crisp linen shirt and a smile that was all teeth.
"Mr. Miller,"
she said, her voice smooth as polished stone.
"what a pleasant surprise."
"Hi, Brenda," I said, trying to keep it friendly and casual. "Hope I'm not bothering you. I just got your letter and wanted to clear things up. It's about the slope in our backyard." "Ah, yes," she said, nodding slowly, her expression unchanged. "The green coverage issue." Right. Well, the thing is, nothing really grows there," I explained, feeling confident that logic was on my side. "The soil is terrible, it's mostly clay, and the grade is so steep that any topsoil or seed just washes away. We've talked to people about it. It's a known issue with the lot." I waited for the moment of understanding, "Oh, I see. That makes sense. My mistake." It never came. Instead, Brenda tilted her head slightly. I appreciate you sharing your perspective, Mr. Miller. However, the community bylaws are quite clear. All areas of a property visible to the community must be maintained. The bylaws don't offer exceptions for difficult soil. She said the word difficult as if I'd just made it up. I was starting to feel a prickle of annoyance. But it's not a matter of perspective. It's a matter of geology. It's physically impossible to just make grass grow there without a major construction project. Many homeowners find that professional landscapers can achieve wonderful results in challenging environments, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. The notice is simply a reminder of your responsibilities as a homeowner in Meadow Creek. We all have to do our part to protect our property values. And that was it. The conversation was over. She hadn't budged an inch. She hadn't even acknowledged my point. She just recited her script. I was dismissed. I walked back home, the pleasant afternoon air suddenly feeling a lot heavier. The humor I'd felt earlier had completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, sinking feeling in my stomach. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a problem I could solve with a reasonable conversation. This was the first shot, and it had been fired from a perfectly manicured, award-winning rose garden. So, after my little chat with Brenda, I decided to play ball. I figured, okay, if I make a serious, good-faith effort, she'll see I'm trying and back off. It's amazing how naive you can be when you still believe the world runs on common sense. My first campaign was Operation Seed. I didn't just grab a cheap bag of who knows what from the hardware store. No, I went to the fancy local garden center. The kind of place where the employees have degrees in horticulture. I showed a guy pictures of the slope on my phone. He whistled. That's a tough one, he said, stroking his beard thoughtfully. He sold me on the nuclear option. A $200 bag of a special blend of fescue and rye that was supposedly used on professional golf courses and could thrive in challenging conditions. He also sold me on several bags of peat moss and a special root-stimulating fertilizer. And for a minute, it worked. Tiny green fuzz started to appear. I was ecstatic. I dragged Claire out to see it. Look, I said, pointing with the pride of a new father. It's working. Green coverage. She smiled, relieved. I felt a surge of smug satisfaction. I was wrong, and the expensive seed was right. Then the sun remembered it hated that slope. The tender little shoots didn't stand a chance. Within a week, the fuzz turned yellow, then brown, then just vanished. It was like they'd never been there. The slope was back to its natural state of barren mockery. Almost on cue, the second letter arrived. This one wasn't a courtesy notice. It was a second notice, a violation. The tone had shifted from passively aggressive to actively aggressive. It mentioned a compliance deadline, 30 days, and stated that failure to remedy the violation will result in further action, including the levying of fines as stipulated in the community bylaws. Now I was pissed. This was no longer a misunderstanding. This was a challenge. Claire was getting really nervous. Alex, just call a landscaper, she pleaded. Let's just pay someone to make it go away. But my pride was on the line now. No, I said, my jaw tight. I'm not paying someone hundreds of dollars because of her. I'll handle it. My next plan was Operation Sod, brute force. If I couldn't grow the green, I'd buy it pre-grown and lay it down like a carpet. I did the math, measured the area, and ordered $300 worth of sod. When the pallet was dropped at the end of my driveway, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. Each roll was heavy, damp, and smelled like worms. It took me an entire Saturday of back-breaking labor to haul those things to the back of the house and wrestle them into place on the slope. It was like trying to wallpaper a cliff. The rolls kept trying to slide back down. I was covered in mud, exhausted, and my back was screaming. But at the end of the day, it was done. The slope was green. A perfect, seamless, vibrant green. I stood back, hands on my hips, looking at my handiwork. It was a thing of beauty. I took a picture and emailed it to the HOA Compliance Committee with a short, triumphant message. The landscaping issue has been resolved. I didn't get a reply. For about 3 weeks, we were in the clear. I felt like a king. Every time I looked out the window, I saw my green, sod-covered victory. Then, the edges started to turn brown. Then a yellow patch appeared in the middle. The sod, unable to send its roots down into the hard clay, was dying of thirst from the bottom up. It was a slow, agonizing death. This is when Brenda turned up the psychological warfare. I'd be in my office and see her on her daily patrol. She'd stop at the edge of the common area behind my house and just stare. She'd look at my slowly dying sod, look down at her clipboard, make a note, and shake her head with this look of profound disappointment. She never said a word to me, but she didn't have to. The performance was for my benefit.
Then came the quarterly HOA meeting. Just to see what was going on, Brenda stood up to give the compliance committee report.
After rattling off some stats about garbage cans, she paused and said, "I also want to remind everyone that temporary fixes are not a substitute for proper sustainable maintenance. We are a community of standards, and we must all strive to uphold them for the long term." She scanned the room, and her eyes rested on me for just a second. The whole room was looking at me. My face burned with shame and anger.
I was done. Defeated. I finally caved.
"You were right," I told Claire. "Let's call a pro." I found a landscaping company with great reviews. The owner, a grizzled guy named Sal with hands like leather work gloves, came out the next day. He walked to the back of the yard, took one look at my pathetic patchwork quilt of dying sod, and laughed. Not a mean laugh, just a weary one. He kicked at the dirt on the slope with the toe of his steel-toed boot. It was like kicking a rock. "Son," he said, looking at me with genuine pity, "you can't fight God, and you can't fight geology. This here is builder's fill and compacted clay on a 45-degree grade. You could bring in 1,000 tons of topsoil, and it'd all be at the bottom of the hill after the first big rain."
"So you can't fix it?" I asked, my heart sinking.
"Oh, I can fix it," he said. "I can bring in a bobcat, dig this whole thing out, and build you a tiered retaining wall with proper drainage and irrigation. It'll look great. It'll also run you about $10,000, maybe $12,000.
I must have turned pale because he softened his tone. "Look, kid, I'll be honest with you. Some places just aren't meant to be green. This is one of them." He left, and I was left staring at the ugly, dying monument to my failure. I had tried. I had spent money. I had broken my back. I had consulted experts, and the problem was scientifically unsolvable. And that's when the final letter came. This one wasn't in the mailbox. It was taped to our front door in a plastic sleeve, like an eviction notice. It was from the HOA's legal counsel. It was the letter I told you about, the one that laid on the kitchen table like a death certificate for our life here, the one that gave me 30 days before the fines, the penalties, and the lien. It was no longer a request or a warning. It was an ultimatum. They had escalated things past the point of reason. They had me pinned. I had tried to fight them on their terms, and I had lost, utterly. That lawyer's letter sat on our kitchen table for 2 days. We'd walk past it, not looking at it directly, like it was a dead animal we didn't know how to dispose of. It poisoned the air in the house. Claire was walking on eggshells, her usual bright energy completely gone, replaced by this quiet, simmering anxiety. I'd find her just staring out the window at the slope, her arms crossed tight against her chest. We weren't fighting, but a tense silence had settled between us. The unspoken question hung in every room. What are we going to do? Finally, she broke. I was making coffee, and she came up behind me and just buried her face in my back. I could feel her start to shake. "Just pay them, Alex," she whispered, her voice muffled by my shirt. "Please, I don't care anymore. We'll take out a loan. We'll put it on a credit card. I don't care. Just call that landscaper and pay him the $12,000. I can't live like this. I feel like we're going to lose everything over a patch of dirt." I turned around and held her. She was genuinely terrified. And in that moment, seeing her so broken, something inside me hardened. It wasn't about pride anymore. It wasn't about being right. It was about the simple, brutal injustice of it all. They were terrorizing my family. They were making my wife cry, all because of a landscaping preference. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "We're not giving them a dime. We're not letting them bully us into debt. I'm going to fight this, the right way." She pulled back, her eyes red. How? You heard what Sal said. You heard what the lawyer said. There's no right way left. Yes, there is, I insisted, though I was mostly trying to convince myself. I've been going about this all wrong. I've been dealing with Brenda one-on-one. She's just one person. There's a whole board. They can't all be unreasonable psychopaths. I'm going to present them with a formal case. A logical, documented, undeniable case. They're human beings. They have to listen to reason. Oh, sweet summer child, Alex. You had so much to learn. I spent the entire next weekend building my case file. I was meticulous. I approached it like a design project, with the goal of making my argument so clear and compelling that to deny it would be an act of pure, willful ignorance. First, I wrote a long, formal letter addressed to the members of the Meadow Creek HOA Board of Directors. I laid out the entire timeline, from the first notice to the lawyer's letter. I was polite, respectful, and factual. Then, I gathered my evidence. Exhibit A. Copies of the receipts for the $200 miracle seed and the $300 sod. Proof of my good faith efforts. Exhibit B. I called Sal, the landscaper, and asked him if he'd be willing to write up a professional assessment. For $50, he emailed me a one-page PDF on his company letterhead that stated in no uncertain terms that the embankment in question is composed of high-density compacted clay and builder's fill, making it unsuitable for the cultivation of standard turf grasses without extensive and cost-prohibitive excavation and soil replacement. It was beautiful. Exhibit C. I went online and bought a soil testing kit. The results were comical. The pH was all wrong, and the levels of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium were practically non-existent. It was scientifically, certifiably dead dirt. I included the lab report. I put it all together in a neat folder, the letter, the receipts, the professional assessment, the soil report. I made 5 copies, one for each board member. I drove to the post office and sent each one via certified mail with return receipt requested. It cost me over $40, but it was worth it for the feeling of doing something, of fighting back with facts instead of just frustration. For a week, I heard nothing. But I saw the little green return receipt card show up in our mailbox one by one, signed by each board member. They had received it. They couldn't deny it. I allowed myself a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the thing that ended it. The response came a week later. It was another single sheet of cream-colored paper. It wasn't from the board. It was from Brenda, on behalf of the board. Dear Mr. Miller, it read, the Board of Directors acknowledges receipt of your correspondence. After careful review, the board finds that your property remains in violation of Article 4, Section 4.8. The deadline of 30 days, as stated in the previous legal notice, is firm. We trust you will take the necessary steps to bring your property into compliance. Period. That was it. No mention of my evidence, no counterargument, no explanation. It was like I had sent them a blank piece of paper. They had looked at my carefully constructed case, my facts, my expert testimony, and just ignored it. I felt a rage so pure and hot it almost made me dizzy. My last hope was to find an ally. I thought of my neighbor George, a quiet guy in his 70s who spent most of his time tending to his incredible garden. He was one of the original homeowners. He had to know something. I found him pruning his prize-winning roses, the ones that put Brenda's to shame. I explained the whole situation. Showing him the letter, he read it, his face grim, and handed it back to me. I'm sorry, son, he said, snipping a dead leaf with a precise flick of his wrist. I wish I could tell you I was surprised. But it's insane, George, I said, my voice rising. I proved to them it's impossible. They just don't care. ... He sighed and looked at me over the top of his glasses. You're thinking of them as a board. They're not. They're Brenda's court. 2 of them are golfing buddies and the other 2 are terrified of her. She got them on the board. They owe her. What Brenda wants, Brenda gets, always has. So what do I do? I asked, feeling the last of my hope drain away. He looked around, as if to make sure Brenda wasn't hiding in the bushes. She's been trying to get a clear view of the creek from her back patio for years, he said in a low voice. Your house, and that ugly slope of yours, is right in the way. She figures if she can force you to build a fancy retaining wall, it'll be lower profile than a bunch of overgrown whatever. It's not about the green, son. It's about her view. I just stood there, speechless. It was all a lie. The standards, the property values, the community aesthetic, it was all a cover for one woman's selfish desire for a better view from her patio.
I walked home in a daze. It was over. I had tried to be reasonable. I had tried to be logical. I had presented an airtight case. I had appealed to my neighbors. And I had been beaten. Not by rules or regulations, but by the petty tyranny of one woman and the cowardice of her followers. I walked into the house, dropped my keys on the counter, and looked at Claire.
You were right, I said, my voice hollow. There's no way to win. The week after my talk with George was one of the worst of my life. The deadline on that lawyer's letter was no longer a distant threat. It was a ticking clock. Every morning I'd wake up with a knot of dread in my stomach. The number 1300, the amount of money I'd already thrown away, played on a loop in my head, followed by the much larger number 12,000, the cost of surrender. Claire and I stopped talking about it. The topic was too heavy, too radioactive. We'd talk about her day at school, my design projects, what to have for dinner, anything but the financial sword of Damocles hanging over our heads. We were just coexisting in a state of quiet, shared misery. I wasn't sleeping much. I'd lie in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through scenarios, each one worse than the last. Taking out a loan, selling our car, borrowing from our parents. Every option felt like a failure. It was during one of those nights, somewhere in the deep silent hours, that it happened. I'd given up on sleep and was downstairs on the couch, wrapped in a blanket in the dark. I was doing what every modern person does when faced with overwhelming anxiety, doom scrolling on my phone. Just thumbing through an endless feed of memes, political arguments I didn't want to be in, and videos of cats falling off of things. Anything to numb my brain.
I was deep down the rabbit hole of some random subreddit. I don't even remember which one, maybe something about gardening or homesteading. My eyes were blurry, my mind was mush, and I almost scrolled right past it. It was a post with a title that was just odd enough to snag my attention. Something like, "The HOA demanded a green lawn, so I gave him a nightmare." Curiosity, for the first time in weeks, poked its head out. I tapped on it. Practice Kate. The story was from some guy in a similar situation. He had a patch of useless land, a tyrannical HOA, the whole works. He wrote about his failed attempts, the money he'd spent. It was like reading my own diary. And then he got to his solution. He said he'd solved his problem with something called mint seed bombs. My first reaction was to scoff. It sounded like a gimmick, some snake oil from the internet. Mint, like the stuff you put in tea. But then I kept reading. The guy was raving about it. He wrote, and this is the part that made the hairs on my arm stand up, the best part is, it's technically perfect for their demands. It's green, it spreads aggressively in the worst soil, and the deep roots are actually amazing for erosion control. Erosion control. The phrase hit me like a splash of ice water. I threw the blanket off and sat bolt upright on the couch, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. Where had I heard that exact phrase before? I scrambled up, went to the kitchen and fumbled for the light switch. There, on the counter, was my folder of failure. I ripped it open and pulled out the very first violation notice, the courtesy one. My eyes scanned the page, my finger tracing the lines, and there it was, the key, the beautiful, vague, corporate-speak loophole that had been sitting in front of me the whole time. The violation notice demanded that I, quote, establish adequate green coverage using appropriate plant materials for erosion control. I looked from the letter in my hand to my phone, still glowing with the Reddit post. A slow, giddy, slightly unhinged feeling started to bubble up from the pit of my stomach. The exhaustion and despair I'd been drowning in for weeks began to recede, replaced by a surge of pure, high-octane adrenaline. I grabbed my laptop from my bag, flipped it open on the kitchen table and started typing. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I wasn't a beaten-down homeowner anymore. I was a researcher. I was a strategist. I was a man with a mission. Google search. Is mint good for erosion control? Champion. Article after article popped up. University agricultural websites, environmental blogs, gardening forums. The consensus was a resounding yes. Its root system, or rhizomes, created a dense underground mat that was incredibly effective at holding soil in place.
Check. ...
Google search. Is mint an appropriate plant material? ...
Well, it's a plant. It's not illegal. It's sold in every garden store in America. The word appropriate was subjective. And whose definition mattered more? Mine, backed by scientific evidence of its erosion control properties, or Brenda's, based on her desire for a better view of a creek? I liked my chances. Check.
Finally, I searched for the product itself, Bad Apples, Double Mint Seed Bombs.
The name alone was a work of art. I found them on eBay. The product description was a symphony of malicious compliance keywords, a vigorous and aggressive spreader, ideal for conquering challenging terrain where other plants fail, establishes a permanent aromatic ground cover. It sounded less like a plant and more like a biological weapon. ... I leaned back in my chair, the kitchen lit only by the blue glow of the laptop screen. A wide, uncontrollable grin spread across my face. It was perfect. It was diabolical. It was 100% compliant with their stupid, vaguely worded demands. They never said it had to be grass. They never said it couldn't be an invasive, impossible-to-kill herb that would colonize every square inch of earth it could reach. Their started ones a distance as
They wanted green coverage.
Oh, I was going to give them green coverage. I was going to give them a biblical plague of green coverage.
I looked at the price on the eBay listing. $35. After all the money I'd poured into their approved, appropriate solutions, the key to my glorious, fragrant revenge cost less than dinner in a movie.
With a single, triumphant click, I hit buy it now. And for the first time in a month, I went back to bed and slept like a baby.
Waiting for that little brown box to arrive was a special kind of torture.
On the outside, I had to pretend everything was the same. I was still the beaten down, defeated husband moping around the house trying to figure out how we were going to avoid financial ruin. But on the inside, I was vibrating with a secret manic energy. I had a plan. I had a weapon. And it was currently making its way through the U.S. postal system with a tracking number I checked probably 20 times a day. Claire kept giving me these concerned looks. "Are you feeling okay, honey?" she asked one night at dinner. "You seem different." "Just tired," I'd lie, pushing food around my plate. I wasn't tired. I was coiled like a spring. I felt like a spy living behind enemy lines, which, I guess, wasn't far from the truth. That night, after Claire went to bed, I converted the kitchen table into my war room. The despair that had filled this space just days before was gone, replaced by the focused energy of a general planning a campaign. I spread out every piece of paper related to this whole ordeal: the original courtesy notice, the second and third warnings, the final legal ultimatum, my rejected appeal with all its beautiful evidence, and a fresh printout of the HOA's covenants, conditions, and restrictions. With a yellow highlighter, I went through every line of every document. I wasn't looking for a way out anymore. I was looking for the exact dimensions of their trap, so I could rig it to blow up in their faces. I highlighted every vague, subjective word: appropriate, aesthetic, community standards, nuisance. The documents were littered with them. They were designed to be unassailable, giving the board total interpretive power. But a vague word is a two-edged sword, and I was about to start swinging. The most important part of the plan wasn't just throwing the seeds. It was the cover story. The preemptive strike that would make my actions seem not just reasonable, but laudable. I opened a new document on my laptop and started drafting the email I would send to the entire HOA board the morning after the deployment. My first draft was simple. To whom it may concern, I have planted mint on the slope to control erosion. I deleted it. Too weak. Too honest. I started again. This time, channeling my inner corporate drone. I imagined how Brenda would write it. I used the most sterile, jargon-filled language I could think of. I revised and rewrote it for almost an hour, chiseling each sentence until it was a masterpiece of bureaucratic nonsense. Words like deployed instead of thrown, professional-grade erosion control solution instead of seed bombs, premium mint varieties instead of just mint. I even added selected for aggressive establishment in challenging terrain, a phrase I'd shamelessly lifted from the eBay listing. By the time I was done, it sounded so official, so technical, so completely and utterly boring that I knew it was perfect. It was a Trojan horse made of corporate speak.
The final piece of the puzzle was Claire. I couldn't do this without her. I was terrified she'd think I'd lost my mind and try to stop me. The next evening, I sat her down at the kitchen table. I laid out all the documents, my highlighted copy of the bylaws, and the articles I'd printed out about mint and erosion control. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "I have an idea, and I need you to hear me out before you say anything." She looked at the mess of papers, her face etched with worry. "Alex, what is this?" I told her everything. I told her about the sleepless night, the random Reddit post, the loophole in their own notice. I explained the science of the mint's root system. I showed her the eBay listing for the Bad Apples double mint seed bombs, education point. Her eyes got wider and wider. "Alex, are you insane?" she whispered. "This is a joke, right? You're going to throw mint bombs into the yard? They will crucify us. This is poking the bear."
No, it's not, I said, trying to keep my voice calm and steady.
"It's feeding the bear exactly what it asked for. They didn't ask for grass, Claire. They asked for, quote, green coverage, using, quote, appropriate plant materials, quote, for erosion control. I am going to give them exactly that, and I'm going to document it in a way they can't argue with."
I turned my laptop toward her and showed her the email I had drafted. I read it aloud, doing my best impression of a boring, monotone executive.
Dear members of the board, this email is to formally notify you that, in accordance with the violation notice regarding Article 4, Section 4.8, I have taken decisive action. This morning, I deployed a professional-grade erosion control solution on the rear embankment of my property. This solution features premium mint varieties specifically selected for their proven ability for aggressive establishment in challenging terrain. I kept reading, and as I did, something amazing happened. The corner of her mouth twitched. Then a small snort of laughter escaped. By the time I got to the end, she was covering her mouth, her shoulders shaking. "Aggressive establishment?" she choked out, tears of laughter now streaming down her face. "You're a monster." "They wanted green coverage," I said, a huge grin spreading across my own face. "And the best part? The professional grade solution?" I paused for dramatic effect. $35. That broke her. She threw her head back and let out a loud, cathartic laugh. The first real, joyous sound I'd heard from her in weeks. The tension that had been choking our house for a month finally shattered. She looked at me, her eyes shining with a mixture of amusement and awe. "Okay," she said, wiping her eyes. "Okay, you magnificent bastard. Let's do it." Now we were a team. We finalized the last details together. The deployment would happen Friday night after dark. It would give the seeds the whole weekend to settle in before Brenda's Monday morning patrol. The plan was ready. My despair had turned into a secret, and now that secret had an accomplice. We weren't victims anymore. We were insurgents. That Friday night felt like a scene out of a spy movie, if the spies were a couple of out-of-their-depth suburbanites armed with dirt balls. We waited until the neighborhood was quiet, well after most of our neighbors had settled in to watch TV. The only lights were the faint blue glow of screens through distant windows and the pale, silvery light of the moon. "Ready?" I whispered to Claire in the darkened kitchen. She nodded, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. She looked like she was about to either rob a bank or throw up. As I'll ever be. I retrieved the coffee can from the garage. We stood on the back porch for a moment, the 5 little seed bombs resting in my palm. They felt heavy, dense with potential. I handed 2 to Claire. "Just aim for the middle," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Give him a good spread." "God, Alex, this is insane," she breathed, but she was smiling. We crept to the edge of the patio. On the count of 3, we let them fly. We weren't graceful. My first one went a little high, Claire's kind of wobbled, but they all landed with a series of soft, satisfying thumps on the dry, barren earth of the slope. 5 little payloads of chaos delivered under the cover of darkness. We didn't stick around to admire our work. We scurried back inside, locked the door, and then just stood there in the dark, breathing heavily, before we both burst into suppressed, hysterical laughter. The next morning, the adrenaline was still humming in my veins.
This was the point of no return. I sat down at my laptop, opened my email drafts, and stared at the message I'd labored over. It was my alibi, my declaration of compliance, my masterpiece. I took a deep breath, attached a photo of the receipt for the Bad Apples double mint seed bombs, and hit send. The email shot off into the ether, addressed to Brenda Jenkins and the entire HOA board. The weekend was agonizing. Every time my phone buzzed with an email notification, my heart leaped into my throat. But there was nothing from the HOA, just silence. For the first couple of weeks, nothing happened. The slope remained as bald and ugly as ever. A seed of doubt began to sprout in my mind. Had I been scammed? Was it all a joke? Did I just throw $35 worth of useless dirt onto a pile of other useless dirt? Claire would ask me every day, "See anything yet?" And I'd have to shake my head, feeling more foolish each time. And then, one morning I saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible speck of vibrant green against the pale brown clay. I actually ran outside to get a closer look. It was a mint sprout. Just one, but it was there. The next day, there were a dozen. A week later, there were hundreds. The mint grew with an almost violent enthusiasm. It was like the barren soil, having been denied life for so long, was making up for lost time. The plants were vigorous, healthy, and a shocking electric green. Within 6 weeks, the transformation was complete. The slope was gone. In its place was a thick, lush, beautiful carpet of deep green mint. It was more successful than I could have ever dreamed. The air at the back of our house now carried a faint, sweet, refreshing scent. It was objectively gorgeous. The real test came a few days later. I was in my office and saw her, one of Brenda's lieutenants, the short one with the visor, doing her compliance walk. She stopped at the edge of the common area and looked at my property. I held my breath. She looked down at her clipboard, then up at my backyard. Her eyes widened slightly. I could see the surprise on her face. She stood there for a full minute, just staring at the beautiful green hill. Then she made a note on her clipboard, turned, and walked away. A week later, a letter arrived. Another beige envelope. My hands were trembling a little as I opened it. It was short and to the point. This notice is to confirm that the violation of Article 4, Section 4.8 pertaining to the property at your address has been cured. Your file has been updated to reflect that the property is now in compliance with community standards. Thank you for your prompt attention to this matter. I let out a whoop of triumph. I'd done it. I'd actually done it. I had beaten them. I had stared into the bureaucratic abyss, and the abyss had blinked. I was so proud of that letter that I actually framed it and hung it in my office. Claire and I celebrated that night. We ordered our favorite takeout, opened a bottle of wine, and toasted to aggressive establishment. We thought the war was over. We were so wrong. By the time the first frost hit, the situation was escalating. I saw mint sprouting in the mulch of the common area behind my property. I even saw a cluster of it starting to grow near my neighbor George's immaculate vegetable garden. I saw him looking at it one day, and I walked over, ready to apologize. He just looked at me, a slow grin spreading across his face, and gave me a very deliberate wink before turning back to his tomatoes. But the real show began the following spring. After the snow melted, the mint didn't just come back. It erupted. It was an explosion of green. The runners had spent all fall and winter creeping and spreading underground, and now they were launching a full-scale invasion of Meadow Creek. It was no longer confined to my property. It was everywhere. It was choking out the sad little decorative shrubs the HOA had planted along the walking path. It was forming a fuzzy green ring around the base of our community mailbox cluster. It was starting to pop up in the pristine, carefully fertilized lawns of my neighbors on either side. I stood on my back porch one sunny April morning, looking at the unfolding chaos. My beautiful, perfect solution had breached containment. The counterattack was no longer under my control. It was a self-replicating, aromatic, and gloriously invasive force of nature. And I realized this wasn't the end of the war. This was just the beginning of a whole new, much more interesting phase. That spring, Meadow Creek underwent a hostile, aromatic takeover. The Mint, having established its beachhead on my slope, launched a full-scale offensive. It was a silent green invasion. Its underground runners, like a network of tiny green saboteurs, tunneled under fences and sidewalks, popping up in the most delightful and unexpected places.
It formed a perfect, fragrant ring around Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning gnome collection. It sprouted with defiant cheerfulness in the cracks of the walking path. My personal favorite was the thick, lush patch that grew directly in front of the "Please Keep Off the Grass" sign in the common area. It was art.
The entire neighborhood began to smell faintly of spearmint, especially after a rain or in the early morning. Our mailman, Dave, was thrilled. "Dude, I don't know what's going on," he said to me one afternoon while handing me a package. "But my route now smells like a pack of Wrigley's. It's fantastic."
The community Facebook group, however, was where the real civil war broke out. It was glorious. The page, which was usually a boring stream of posts about lost cats and garage sales, exploded with Mint-related content. It was a 50-50 split between outrage and delight. You'd have a post from someone like Barbara, a known Brenda loyalist. "Urgent. Does anyone know what the HOA is doing about this Mint menace? It has completely taken over my azaleas, and I fear for the safety of my petunias. This is an outrage." And right below it, a comment from a new dad down the street. "Honestly, Barbara, my mojito game has never been stronger. Does anyone have a good recipe for mint simple syrup? Asking for a friend." Then another. "My kids' seasonal allergies are horrible this year. I'm convinced it's this new, highly fragrant plant that is blanketing our shared community spaces. Someone has to be held responsible." Followed by, "Where's the best place to harvest? The patch by the mailboxes seems particularly robust." I stayed out of it, of course. I just sat back and watched the chaos unfold, sipping a cup of fresh mint tea. Through the neighborhood grapevine, which was mostly my neighbor George leaning over the fence while pretending to inspect his hydrangeas, I heard about the HOA's frantic, failing efforts. They were in full panic mode. First, they called in a big corporate landscaping company. A guy in a polo shirt came out, walked around for 15 minutes, and quoted them a price that, according to George, was so astronomical that one of the board members actually gasped. It involved removing tons of topsoil and installing deep root barriers. The board politely declined. Next, they tried a smaller, local crew. That guy apparently took one look at the scale of the, quote, problem, laughed, and told Brenda, "Ma'am, you don't have a weed problem. You have a mint farm. My advice is to learn to love it. Maybe open a small tea shop." They were stuck. They had a full-blown botanical rebellion on their hands, and every expert was telling them it was either financially impossible or just plain hopeless to fight it. The inevitable finally happened. A notice was taped to every door in the neighborhood. "Emergency HOA meeting to discuss urgent landscaping matters and a proposed special assessment." This was it. The showdown. "We have to go," Claire said, her eyes dancing with mischief. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." The community clubhouse was packed. I'd never seen so many people at one of these things. It was standing room only. The air was thick with tension, gossip, and the very faint, ever-present scent of mint that everyone had tracked in on their shoes. Claire and I found a spot in the back, determined to be quiet observers. Brenda stood at the podium at the front of the room. She was not the cool, collected tyrant I'd met in her doorway. Her face was flushed, her knuckles were white, where she gripped the sides of the podium. She was radiating pure fury. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice tight. "As you know, our community has been invaded by an aggressive, invasive species that threatens the aesthetic integrity and property values of Meadow Creek. She went on for 10 minutes, never using the word mint, instead opting for dramatic phrases like horticultural sabotage and aromatic blight. She painted a grim picture of a future where every lawn was consumed by this unrelenting menace. Then she got to the point. "The board has consulted with experts. The eradication will be a difficult, multi-year process. Therefore, the board proposes an emergency special assessment of $200 per household, effective immediately, to fund the first phase of the Meadow Creek recovery program." The room erupted. People were yelling, shouting about the cost, about the unfairness. It was beautiful chaos. Brenda banged the gavel, calling for order.
When the noise died down a little, a calm voice cut through the room. "A point of order, Madam President."
It was George. He was standing up slowly, holding a copy of the HOA bylaws. Every head in the room turned to him. "Before we vote on spending," he continued, his voice steady and clear, "nearly $20,000 of our money, I was hoping the board could clarify a small point in our governing documents. I'm looking at Article 4, Landscaping and Maintenance, Section 4.2.7.
Brenda stared at him, her eyes narrowing. "What is your point, George?" George put on his reading glasses.
"Well, it says right here," he said, reading directly from the page, "the removal, disturbance, or destruction of any vegetation, including but not limited to trees, shrubs, and ground cover, that originates from a private property owner's planting, is strictly prohibited without the explicit written consent of said property owner."
He took off his glasses and looked around the room. "Now, I'm just a simple gardener," he said, "but my understanding is that this aromatic species originated from a single property, and as such, the HOA is legally forbidden from touching a single leaf of it on public or private land without getting written permission from the person who planted it."
A profound, glorious silence fell over the room. You could have heard a pin drop. Then, very slowly, head by head, everyone turned to look at me, standing in the back. I didn't say a word. I just gave the smallest, most innocent shrug I could muster.
Brenda's face was a priceless work of art. It cycled through shock, rage, and finally the pale blotchy white of utter defeat.
Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She was trapped. She was cornered. She had been publicly, legally, and beautifully checkmated by her own rulebook. Someone in the front row snorted. Another person giggled. And then, the dam broke. The room dissolved into laughter. The motion for a special assessment was never even voted on. The meeting fell apart in a wave of jokes and chatter.
Brenda stormed out of the room, her face like thunder. A half-dozen people clapped me on the back as we left. I was a folk hero.
Claire and I walked home under the streetlights, not saying anything. We didn't need to. The cool night air was sweet with the smell of mint. The war was over, and the victory was absolute.
It's been about a year since the Great Mint War, as some of the neighbors have taken to calling it. Life in Meadow Creek has found a new and decidedly more fragrant normal.
I'm sitting on my back porch right now, sipping a mojito. The mint, naturally, is from a patch that has tried to colonize my patio steps. I just plucked it a few minutes ago. From here, I have a perfect view of the slope. It's no longer a barren scar. It's a wild, untamed jungle of green. It's thick and lush, and in the late afternoon sun, it practically glows. Bees love it. In a weird way, it's the most beautiful, vibrant thing in this entire manicured neighborhood.
The new HOA board is normal. It's run by a handful of reasonable people, including George, who reluctantly agreed to be the treasurer. Their first act was to formally rescind a dozen of the most ridiculous rules from the bylaws, including the one about having to get approval for the brand of your barbecue grill. The vibe in the neighborhood has completely changed. It feels less like a tightly controlled experiment in conformity and more like a place where actual human beings live.
And the mint? The mint is now our mascot. It's a permanent feature of Meadow Creek. It's in the lawns, it's in the flower beds, it's along the sidewalks, and people have, for the most part, embraced it. We've become the Mint neighborhood. The annual block party last summer featured a Best Mojito contest. New homeowners are told the story as a kind of welcoming legend, a cautionary tale about the old regime. The Mint made our cookie-cutter development unique. It gave us a story. As for me, this whole stupid, stressful, absurd ordeal changed things. Before, I always felt like a guest here, a cynical outsider just passing through the suburbs. I was living in a house, but it wasn't really my home. But you can't fight a war, even a dumb, fragrant one, over a piece of land without putting down roots. I fought for my right to have an ugly backyard, and in doing so, I accidentally made a home.
I know my neighbors now. I talk to George almost every day. I trade jokes with Dave, the mailman. I'm part of the community Facebook page, not as a lurker, but as a guy who actually posts, mostly mint recipes. Claire and I are happier than ever. The stress of the fight, once it was over, brought us closer. Sometimes I'll catch her looking out at the slope and
she'll just shake her head and laugh. Our private joke has become a public landmark.
It's funny. I spent so much time and money trying to force that patch of land to be something it wasn't. A perfect, boring, grassy hill. I was trying to play by their rules, to fit into their mold, and I failed spectacularly. It was only when I gave up and embraced the chaos, when I decided to work with its stubborn, barren nature instead of against it, that I actually succeeded.
I take another sip of my mojito. The ice clinks in the glass. It's sharp, sweet, and cool. It tastes like victory. Brenda wanted green coverage. She wanted to improve her view. In the end, she got both. It just wasn't the view she had in mind. And for that, every single day, I am profoundly grateful.